Welcome to a show that deals with some of the issues in our country and in our communities, dealing with issues that deal with race, social justice, poverty, and so on. My name is Aljamal Binden. I'm going to interview a person called Kamau N'Namdi, who has been involved in a number of activities. He did a previous show with us here some months ago related to his experience dealing with the Omaha uh, city appeal process and how much it was a sham and so on. Also, recently he had an opportunity some months ago to participate in the jury duty, and I've always wanted to be in the jury duty, but they excluded me for many reasons, obviously. And I've only got selected to go downtown once, and again I got excluded because I guess they looked at me, knew I was going to decide on behalf of the low-income person and do what we call jury nullification because this whole system is corrupt and so on. But anyway, the criminal
Right.
justice system that operates in the community of Texarkana is such a challenge. And we asked Kamal if he would come and talk to us about his experiences of what it was like being on this jury, dealing with a case that I think relates to a lot of people in our community. We also understand that the whole criminal justice system is appropriately named because it's racist and it also has railroaded many people for many years into prison for crimes they have not committed. That's what the Innocent Project is about. But we oftentimes don't have the system correct in itself, from law enforcement to judges to corrupt cops and to prosecutors and public pretenders and so on. So Kamal's ordeal illustrates the level of corruption, I guess, in his situation, but also some issues he learned about it that we should know about. So we're inviting him to talk about his experience ordeal of dealing with how it can help our community understand what jury duty is about, and also understand if Lady Justice is really blind. Because for many people of color and low-income people, they do not always get a fair trial unless they have adequate representation. Again, the way the law system and law schools are operating, they oftentimes don't get that. So first, Kamal, can you share a little bit more about yourself with the audience?
All right. Just born and raised in the Omaha, Nebraska community there on the north side. Um, After I graduated from college, I moved to Texas, where I now reside. Small community, about 75,000 people here in this community, and it's actually a border city, bordering between Arkansas and Texas. But in my experience here, I've had maybe four opportunities that I was called for jury duty. And this last time, I was actually selected to sit on the jury panel of 12. And then we had, of course, one alternate who we did not use at the time because all of the 12 jurors, including myself, we were all available for the trial, which lasted 3 days, actually 3 days and 3 full days at that. But in this community, which is very, very small compared to the community I grew up in, Omaha, Nebraska, but I have experienced and seen some of the same issues when it comes to dealing with law enforcement, dealing with the criminal justice system. I've seen the same thing here in a small community in Texas and Arkansas as I've seen in Omaha, Nebraska.
Well, kind of a follow-up. Give us an overview of the case and also the makeup of the jury, because I think those are very important concepts. Tell a little bit about
Okay.
what this case is about you on, and then also what was the racial makeup of the jury? I assume the lawyers all involved were white folks, or were they African Americans, or what were the racial of the lawyers? So share a little bit background for our participants.
All right. We were summoned on this particular day, and in the selection of the jury pool, they selected about 53 of us out of maybe 250 people. The 250 included every race, black, white, Hispanic, even Vietnamese. And then when we were selected in the 53 group, it was based on our answers and the survey that they took regarding uh, whether we can sit on a jury and be impartial based on the facts of the case and not any preconceived prejudices, any other notions, anything in our past experience. So in the selection process, it was kind of ironic to me that in the call of the 53 people, out of the rows, we were in 5 rows, and out of the 5 rows, 4 of us or 5 of us were actually on the very first row. I was selected as juror number 10. And then when they called for the actual group of 12, I was juror number 8. And 4 people before me was actually sitting beside me on the same row. So it almost appeared as though they had pre-selected the jury before they did the portion that's
So what
called
I'm
the
asking,
void.
what's the racial makeup of the jury and what was the case about? That's what I'm trying to
And
find.
so here's what we had. They selected 6 white women. There was 1 Vietnamese man, 2 white men, and 3 black men. And then we had an alternate, which was a white female. So in the well, actually, there was 7 white females on the jury and 1 alternate, which was also white. So again, 3 black males, 1 Vietnamese male, 2 white males, and then 6 white females. We did not have 1 black female selected on this jury pool. And our ages ranged from anywhere from 25 to 70 in the jury pool. We initially were out in the jury room listening to the case. And after listening to the case, the judge sent us back to the jury room to decide the guilt or innocence of the person. And I'll give you the details of that in just a moment. The first time. The second time we were sent back after we came back with our decision. The second time we were sent back to make the decision on the time or if he would pay a fine. So the case involved a young white guy who had a history of evading arrest from the officers and theft of stolen property. That was his history. However, this particular case only involved 2 charges. One was evading arrest and detention. The second one was possession of a controlled substance. History of the case was the officers spotted, they had been watching what they called a known drug house. They spotted this individual come to the house, drop off a person, male figure, and then he picked up a female. Then he went to another house, which was in the same area, picked up a black male. The first one he picked up was a white female. Then he picked up a black male. Then he went and he parked near a pharmacy, went in the pharmacy, then came back out. Well, the officers followed him fairly close to his vehicle where they could read the license plate and run that information. And when they ran it, there was no violations, nothing wrong with the vehicle. The officer reported that the reason why they pulled this individual over, or they put on their lights to pull the individual over, was that he didn't have his seatbelt. Ironically, he did have his seatbelt on, but the female passenger in the front seat with him, she did not have her seatbelt on. In the case, after they had put their lights on to stop him, he refused to stop, but he kept on driving. And again, as I said, this is a border city. So the Arkansas side police began chasing him because he had started out going past the speed limit.
Oh, my phone was ringing. We have to edit that out. But when they capture him, what do they do after they capture him? In other words, they capture him, they arrest him. What do they do? So I'm trying to get to the crux of it a lot quicker.
Okay, after they chased him several miles, they captured him because he drove into a lake, and then they got in the lake, swam in, captured him. Then they put him in handcuffs, took him to the county lockup there, and he was there for 9 months before the case. Well, 2 days before, I was actually in the courtroom listening to the court case, and he elected to have a jury trial instead of allowing the actual judge to decide the results of his case. So 2 days later, they paneled the jury, which I was a part of, and that's the case that we heard.
So anyway, what I'm trying to do, Kamau, is I'm trying to get to the essence a lot quicker, and I'm going to say, in these kind of situations, you're on the jury duty, you're dealing with those individuals, and some people say there are all kinds of facts that have an impact on somebody's guilty or not guilty, on depending on some type of new things. Some can say it could be racism, classism. Sometimes the criminal justice system includes people of color. So it's obvious in your conversation there were many people. There was a diverse group in this group. What were some of the concerns you had? Let's say if you had to list 3 quick points that you would have had about your jury experience.
Well, in the jury room, the first part and the second part, my main concern was the openness of the other jurors to what I had to say. As it ended up, when we went in the jury room to make the first decision on the gentleman's guilt or innocence, everyone, it was a 9-3 vote. 9 said he was guilty, 3 said he was not guilty. And there's 2 charges, mind you. Then we discussed why we decided what we decided. Most of the white jurors, let me say the white females, just about all of them said he was guilty because they felt he ran from the police. We saw the video.
By the way, when you say 2 charges, do we know what the 2 charges are?
The first charge is evading arrest and detention, and the second charge was possession of a controlled substance.
Gotcha.
Which the officers found in the car, but not on his possession. And mind you, there were two other persons in the car, but they charged this particular individual. So in our decision, we talked and discussed the case, and then we got down to where it was 11 guilty and 1 not guilty. I was the one not guilty because my argument was, and I argued with them, that number one, the police officers had no probable cause to stop him because what they claimed they stopped him for, there was no charges for that. He was never arrested for any of those charges. The other 2 individuals in the car were also in distance or in proximity of the controlled substance. So there was no proof that the controlled substance belonged to the driver, which was the individual who was on trial at the time. So I voted not guilty on both charges. We discussed the case, and I convinced the other 11 jurors that, yes, this guy was not the one who was in possession of the controlled substance because there were 2 other people in the car. One in which he slowed down and allowed the female to jump out of the car during the chase. And the second one in the car opened the back door, called the police while they were riding, and waved his hand out. This is the black individual who was claiming that he was on his way to see his parole officer, and he thought the driver was an Uber driver. So based on the facts, there was too many things that the police who arrested him, but they didn't arrest either one of the other individuals for any charges, nor did they even test him, or we didn't get any information in the hearing that he was tested for drugs or that he was under the influence of anything, but that they had stopped him and he had decided he didn't want to be stopped. So he claimed that he had a girlfriend about to have a baby. So that's why he ran and wouldn't allow them to stop. So it became a comical issue.
Well, Keystone Cop is what it is. It's not like a lot of police officers in our society, but keep going.
Exactly. Many times they, and we listened to the officers. I think we listened to about 4 or 5 different officers claiming why they chased him. Then when they got to the Texas side, because again, as I said, they went from the Arkansas side, then they crossed the state line, in which they called Arkansas police, the Arkansas sheriff, and they joined in on the chase. So in the chase, there was about 6 different officers chasing this young man for evading arrest and detention. So I said he was not guilty, and I argued that. We argued the first day till about 6 o'clock that evening after we had gotten the case given to us. It was about 4 hours that we discussed it, and most of the discussion was I claimed that the officers, what they did was typical of what they do all the time. They picked out this individual and they decided they wanted to arrest him, not because there was any evidence true against him, but because he was one individual who had no finances. He wasn't a privileged individual. Ironically, he wasn't a black man. He was not a female, but he was just a poor white guy. And the prosecutor claimed he was a danger to society because he had drove through different areas. And I argued in our jury discussion that every time that he drove over the speed limit, the officers drove just as fast. So that if the officers would pull back, because he lives in Texarkana, he's never been anywhere else. History has showed it, his record showed it, and then we asked for his previous record and crimes. He's been in Arkansas, in this little town, for the last 10 years, committing theft of property cases. So he wasn't a danger to society. So there was no reason for them to chase him through the city streets, no reason to make him go 80 miles an hour, no reason to make him go through school zones and it happened at the time school was out because we saw school buses traveling. So it was a situation where we put the blame on him because he evaded arrest and detention, but he was evading arrest without the officers having any full probable cause as to why to chase him. So I laid part of the responsibility.
I want to switch up because I want to keep switching into different concepts I can. If he evaded arrest, what would have been his sentence in this situation? What kind of time for fleeing officer? What kind of numbers are we talking to go to jail or prison or whatever?
They initially said when we took the case to decide we decided his guilt of just the evading arrest. We all dismissed the possession. So when they gave us back the option, they came back, the prosecutor came back, and the judge agreed with 2 years to 20 years.
And we as a jury running from the police. We as a jury could have decided 2 years or 20 years based on the fact that we had said, we agreed finally he was guilty of evading arrest and detention. So in the jury room, we had 6 females, 2 white males, and 1 Vietnamese male, and then 3 black males. Most of the people, again, decided they wanted to give him 20 years. For running from the police.
20 years for running from the police. I said, no. I say give him 2 years. Give him the minimum because he's already been in jail for 9 months. He's been given good time. He's going to be given credit for his time in jail. You give him 2 years in the state penitentiary, he may spend 2 years. But if you give him more than 2 years, based on him being nonviolent, he has never done any crime that used a weapon. All he's ever done was run from the police and receive stolen property and sell it. So he's never been convicted of any drug cases. So he's not a drug addict based on the record. So I thought, well, there's no sense in locking this man up because he was afraid. He gave his excuse. I ran because I didn't want to be locked up while my girlfriend was having my baby. Eventually, she had the baby. She was put in jail. The baby was adopted out to another family. So now he has no.
We don't understand. Why was his girlfriend put in jail? Was she part of this case?
She was part of something else. So he had a situation where his history is being around people who commit crime. Let me say it like that. So basically, he's already convicted before the case. And that's one of the things.
And again, sometimes that goes against you long term, even though each crime happened independent, you serve your time, they still follow you. And they kind of look at all that to say, if you're a habitual criminal, they want to keep you in there forever so they can keep the prisons full and keep the cops making money doing all the kind of stupid stuff they do.
Exactly. And that's normally what happens. That's why I explained to everyone in the jury room that I have been a part of that system where I've been an officer. I've been a parole officer. I've been a probation officer. I've even done the parole reviews based on interviewing inmates, looking at their history, their records, their time, and making a recommendation to the state parole board as to whether to release them or not. So based on that, which we were not to use in determining the time, and I tried heavily not to, but it is one of the things that's most difficult for jurors to do, and that's not to use their preconceived notions, their prejudices, or their future predictions as to what an individual will do. And that's one of the things that the process avoidor tries to eliminate, tries to make us as impartial as possible and only decide the case based on the facts before us.
I'm
That
gonna
is one
switch
of
up. I'm gonna switch up again because I want to keep this as succinct as I can. Angela Davis in her book deals with abolitionists, meaning get rid of the whole prison system because corrupt, is dirty, and it plays a greater role against people of color and low-income folks who don't have that. Some
yes,
argue that the industrial prison complex should be abolished because it has many factors. In fact, it's dysfunctional. People go in there and make them worse than they are. The racism, and also the fact that we got a disproportionate high number of African Americans in that system, and it allows wealthy white people to get it free, like President Trump, who should be in jail
yes.
right now or prison. What suggestion you have for legislation that will improve the system, make it fair for people who make up the majority of that prison system, who spend inordinate amount of time that they shouldn't be in there? So what suggestion
The
you have
first,
to the prison system
the
based
first thing, yes, the first thing I would say, Jamal, would be that the legislators who decide um, who should be in charge of, or who should be in leadership position, who decide cases, who decide the time, and this includes the persons that are appointed on the benches, the judges, persons that are elected as district attorneys and prosecuting attorneys, even those that are actually defense attorneys. They are disproportionately unrepresentative of the people that actually end up in jail. And that's because they are different. They are people of color who go before the system. And we go before a system with racist judges, racist district attorneys, and those are the ones that in many cases get elected. And in many cases, they're the ones who make the decision. So I would suggest that before we can say incarcerate someone, make sure the person who's doing the decision or the deciding of that is one of the persons who has some sort of familiarity with that person's culture, that person's way of life. And like you said, sometimes the history of a person does more detriment to that person's future because we look at that and not realize that anyone can change. And that's one of the problems we had in this
so that
particular
would be
case.
one. What would be your number two on?
Number two would be, I would say we need to make sure that people of color are the ones that sit on the bench more and more. And unfortunately, many of them have difficulty because the system is racist in terms of the grading when they go to these universities and schools of learning and law practice. We have very few lawyers that are given the opportunity to sit on benches. And that's because, again, the privileged ones, as you mentioned, Trump, they're the ones that get that have the money to buy. And then we don't know about these backroom deals. They buy them positions, they buy the offices, and then they're the ones that sit and make decisions on those that are before them in court on these small cases and trial.
What was your number three?
Well, I would say that one of the things that we need to do is we need to go to the legislatures, and we need to vote some of these legislators out that are not concerned with people of color, people in our community, people of low income, because they're not concerned with them. So the more of us that go to the voting polls and vote these people out and vote in people that are concerned with our concern, that are part of our community. And one of the things I would suggest is people of color and people that look like you and I would do more to try to get in these positions where we can make these decisions.
Good. You know, one other thing I'd like to add is I talked to a local attorney. He says that many of the African Americans who go through law school, they become administrative flunkies and bootlickers and Uncle Toms and sellouts. And many of them don't practice law. Some don't even pass the bar exam because they've been sleeping all day in law school or doing some other breakdance and stuff. So we have an underrepresentation of astute African lawyers who fight against the system. And oftentimes they get bribed and corrupt. And so in Nebraska, for example, I can't think of too many lawyers who deal with race issues. You got a bunch of great white saviors and mean white girls who call themselves diversity lawyers. But again, you're not going to get, as R.G. Lord says, you can't use the master's tool to destroy his house. And so we got these people who are inside systems kind of public pretender, for example, been in the job for over 40 years and he shared at a meeting, he only has one person of color on his staff out of maybe 40, 50 people. How does that work? Then he gets
How does it work?
I can't find nobody. Well, you need to figure out how to get money so that you make less money and that somebody can come in there to reduce those numbers of all these black and brown inmates who are in that system or low income whites because you guys are making money and bank off of them. But let's switch up. I'm going to ask a different question. When
Yes.
someone goes to prison, what kind of time do they normally really serve? You explained it a little bit, but if you go to, let's say, a state prison, a local prison, there's a certain amount of time you sign. You go to a federal prison, you serve time. So what is this helping you with this time thing between jail, county, and prison time, or even federal? We don't have no clue what kind of time would it mean. Say,
in most cases, a person doing time at the local level, say in the county jail, they get half a day per day that they serve. Many times the ones in the county jails who are awaiting sentencing and transport to the state facilities, once they arrive at state facilities, if they're there for nonviolent crimes, the rule is generally, in Texas, that is, generally they only spend 1/4 of the time that they're sentenced.
So in other words, if the judge gives them a year, they only do 1/4 of the time, is what you're saying.
Generally, they'll only do 1/4, which is like 3 months, because
in the local jails, right? The jails, right?
In local jails, yes.
What about prisons?
Or state facilities. Say, for example,
when you say state, do you mean prison or do you mean jail? People don't always understand between the jail.
Okay. Local, I mean jail. That's in the county jail, which might be, say, for example, downtown Omaha.
Okay.
Most cities have a county lockup or a county jail. They'll spend anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of their time if they're there for nonviolent crimes.
Right.
If their sentence is of such nature that they have to move them to a state facility because that's a state felony. Sometimes you have state felonies, you have federal crimes, that's crimes across state lines and so forth. Then they go to the federal penitentiary, as you mentioned. But generally, in a state facility, a person who's doing nonviolent crime will do 1/4 of the time. If you're doing a crime violent or with a weapon, sexual crime, or a crime against a child, you're generally going to spend 1/2 of your time, and with credit for good time, you're eligible for parole. Then once you're eligible for parole, either by doing 1/4 or 1/3 of your time, then it becomes a decision of the parole board in that state whether they release you. Because most of the jails, say, for example, here in Texas, they're full. Texas has one of the largest criminal justice system and largest amount of prisons in the country. And most of them are full to capacity. And most of the nonviolent.
Let's go to the federal. Is the federal time the same as the state time and the local time?
Most of the time it's different because the federals have fewer facilities, but they're throughout the country. And it's a selection process with the federal prison system determining if a person commits a crime that's considered a federal crime, a crime where they cross state lines, then they'll end up in a federal penitentiary.
Okay, gotcha.
It could be anywhere in the country.
Gotcha.
Anywhere in the country.
Gotcha. The other thing I heard from someone is that federal time, they don't give you free time or comp time. So in other words, when they say 7 years in federal, you get 7. In the other,
you're doing 7 years.
Negotiate, or they can give you good time. But federal, and the other thing that happens with the county attorneys, county prosecutors, or U.S. attorneys, they negotiate depending on how well a person snitches or the severity of the crime if you go to federal. So I understand that sometimes if you're a black person, they'll bump you up because he's racist,
right.
Ex-slave enforcers type mentality. You do more time in prison than they do their white counterparts or their friends or people who are their buddies or part of their fraternities or sororities they've been part of in their communities. I want to switch up. We only got so much time, and I'm going to ask you, and this sounds like a loaded question, but it sounds like an easy question. Do you think in Texas, and we know Texas has one of the biggest arcane, draconian prison system in a country like Louisiana and the chain gang and that, do you think race plays a part? Again, if somebody's going to come and look in a prison in Texas or any given places, do you think race plays a part, or do we overemphasize, say that black people are committing disproportionate crimes, so therefore they should go to prison. But how do you explain race in prisons, or can you explain that in Texas? I'm talking only about Texas.
Right. I don't see that blacks or non-whites commit disproportionate amount of cases. I have actually, as I said before, reviewed cases from inmates who are in prison, white and black. And when I look at the county that they came from in Texas, sometimes it depends on the county because certain judges in those counties, they handle cases different than other judges. There is statutes that they must follow, but within those statutes, they have a lot of leeway in deciding how much time. I've seen a person, for example, with the same charge, possession of a controlled substance, and it is a case where it was proven that the controlled substance was baking soda mixed with uh, cocaine, for example. And I've seen a white inmate who has been in one county receive maybe 5 years for that case based on, the amount of grams. I have actually interviewed and seen cases where that same county, a black inmate came from the county and got twice as much time. And I've even seen a case which is ridiculous. For the same charge, a person has gotten life in prison. Of course, he's not going to do life because the jails and the state facilities are so full. They want to parole him just as soon as they can get him out because he has an amount of good time, flat time. So there is a disproportionate amount of black and Hispanic inmates in prison for cases and crimes identical to the white inmates. But because they're not given the same time, say for example, it's quite true. It's not overemphasized that the blacks and the non-whites get more time per case than the white inmates do, and that's because that happens at the county level, or it happens at the city level, where you have these county judges and city judges and district attorneys who, that mentality is still there. Racism is still existing in all areas of this society. It's sometimes you can say it's institutional. Sometimes it's just because, hey, this is the way they've been brought up and that's what they do. So we have to deal with that because it is a fact of life in this country.
Gotcha. The last question I want to ask you: do you have any comments for our participants or our audience that you want to share before we close out?
I tell you one thing is with this on a jury is not for those that are faint of heart, because many times you'll be given a case that is complicated. It is difficult because you're in the position where you're deciding someone's freedom or loss of freedom. You're in a position where you're deciding how much time someone can be locked up or not. I've never experienced it, but I assure you, being an officer in a penitentiary, that's not the kind of life anyone wants to live. And those that are compelled to live that for whatever the reason, and we're not here to deal with that, but for whatever the reason, it's not where you want to go. So those of us that are fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to sit on the jury, you must be ready to deal with the different personalities and deal with the facts of a case that's not always as simple as it looks. So that's one of the things I would say to the audience, that, even though I was the fourth time selected for jury duty, if I had to do it again, I probably would not if I had a choice. But I didn't have a choice because I was selected. But under being selected, I knew at that time my integrity meant more than anything else. Right, whether it was the officers or the inmate, right was supposed to win out. Wrong will pop his head up every time. And if you're on the jury, I guarantee you, while you're listening to the facts of a case or you're given the information of the case, you're going to see corrupt, you're going to see racism, especially when it's involved with different people of races, because that's exactly what we saw in this case. This was a good old boy, a good old country boy. So because he was not a wealthy, rich, one that was entitled, one that had privileges, he had to suffer something. So in the end, he received half of the sentence. We gave him 10 years for running from the police. And that makes no sense at all. Because I asked two of the other jurors, I asked the whole jury room, have anybody in here out of us 12 ever ran from the police? I was one that raised my hand, and two other jurors raised their hand to admit that at some point in time, we had ran from the police, but we just didn't get caught like that individual. So based on that system, it's not about fairness. And so I would say that if you're going to be one of them that sits on the jury, you have to be ready to say yes to right and no to wrong. If you're not willing to do that, you better hope and pray you have enough excuses to be eliminated from a jury pool.
Well, Kamau N'Namdi, we really appreciate you sharing about how the system operates. We know that many of our county prosecutors, county attorneys, county pretenders, and so on don't educate our community on what the process is. So it's kind of a naive process. They walk in, they don't know what to do and how to deal with it. But I appreciate you sharing that, and hopefully we can have you talk about some of your other experiences dealing with race and issues that help improve our communities and our society. Because right now we're in serious trouble. Thank you very much, and appreciate you greatly.
Thank you.